Chapter 4 Dead Memories. Ivan went back to the house and was met by Marta and Eddie at the start of the driveway. Marta asked Ivan, "Where's Mama?" Ivan pointed up the road with his gun. "Go get her back for me," Ivan said as he looked at Marta with a grin. Marta instantly knew something was wrong and started yelling for her mother. She wheeled Eddie along with her as they were both searching for Natalia. When they got to the road, they could see the car standing in the middle of the road. As they got closer, Eddie pointed out Natalia's body lying in front of the car's rear. Marta started to run until she was at the scene of the murder. She let go of Eddie's chair and dropped to her knees, crying beside him. Eddie grabbed and hugged her, making her face towards him. "Don't look at it," he said as a few tears fell from his eyes. They heard Ivan approach and then saw him get in his dented Lada. Marta stood up and shrieked, "How could you, you bastard!" She pounded on the old Lada repeatedly with her fists as Eddie tried to stop her. Ivan got out of the car and punched her in the face. "Stop being a bitch and clean this shit up," he ordered. Ivan turned the car around, driving back to park at the house. Eddie and Marta stood by Natalia's corpse for a while. "We should take her back," Eddie said, wiping his eyes. Marta agreed reluctantly as they grabbed a leg each and tried to drag Natalia's body. Eddie couldn't drag her properly, because his chair kept turning as he was using one hand to move his wheel. Ivan walked up to them and joked, "Jesus Christ, you two are slow, haven't you ever dragged a body before?" Marta was absolutely grossed out, horrified and furious, but she refused to play his game and said nothing, she just wept. Eddie on the other hand responded to his taunt. "No papa, it's not exactly what you'd call a normal family fun activity." Ivan stood there and smiled at him, then laughed. "You know, I think that's the first funny thing you've ever said." Ivan had a coil of rope and he threw it to Marta, who caught it in surprise. "What am I meant to do with this?" she asked. Ivan looked at her as if she was stupid. "Use it to tie her to Eddie's wheelchair, he can drag her and you can carry her arms." Marta gave him a look as if to ask if he was serious. Ivan got snappy and yelled, "Well, get to it." Marta flinched as he spat at her, while she began tying her mother's legs up. Eddie turned around so Marta could tie the feet of the body to the back of his chair, then once she was fastened securely, Marta picked up her arms and they began moving. Once they were on the drive, Ivan told them to bury her in the open backfield, away from the house. He gave them some shovels and told them he would be watching them from the back porch. The two siblings dug a small hole just big enough for the body and buried her. Looking around, Marta found some old broken planks and decided to use one as a headstone. With an old screw, she carved the words, "Here lies Natalia Sharkovsky, mother, carer, maid. You did your best, Mama. You will be remembered." The two angry and miserable siblings made their way back to their father, who was sitting on a chair while cleaning the blood splatters off his gun. They stood waiting for his next order, to which Ivan responded, "What do you want, a reward for finishing your chores? Go on, get in." Marta held the door open for Eddie and then followed him inside. They went into Eddie's room and closed the door. "Eddie, we have to get out of here, Ivan has gone completely insane." "I'm scared we could be next," Marta said quietly. "You know, he was always fucked in the head, but I do agree he's completely gone now," said Eddie, staring out of the window. Marta leaned over and hugged Eddie. "How could he kill her?" Marta cried. "Because he's no man, he is only a monster," Eddie said, holding Marta tightly. "Tomorrow we'll escape this hell." He let her go and began looking for anything that would come in handy for tomorrow's escape. Marta followed him around his room, helping him. "How do you suggest we get past the devil without getting shot?" Marta asked, worried. "That's easy, said Eddie with a devious grin. We wait till he leaves. Marta, still unsure, asked, but what if he decides to stay in tomorrow? Eddie turned to his drawers and grabbed a clean shirt. He will go, he has to. There's barely enough food to feed me and you. He eats like a pig so he has no choice, explained Eddie. Escape day arrived and Eddie watched his father like a hawk. Marta stayed upstairs, out of the way, waiting for Eddie to give her a signal when it was clear. After 3 hours of sleeping on the sofa, Ivan woke up and was hungry. He walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge, only to find it empty. Ivan sighed. I guess I'm going out for 2 reasons today. Ivan grabbed his car keys and noticed Eddie sitting in his bedroom doorway. I'm going out for a few hours, tell Marta to clean up the house while I'm gone. Eddie arched a brow. Why does she need to clean the house? Looks fine to me. Ivan stood in front of the door and gave Eddie an annoyed glare. Because I fucking said so. But hey, if you've got such a fucking problem with that, then why don't you do it? Eddie stared at him with a look of hatred. I'll let her know, Eddie said in a defeated tone. Good, do as you are told. Now I'll be back soon so don't you shitheads do anything stupid. Eddie reversed into his room. Yeah, we know. Eddie sighed as he watched his father walk out the door and to his car. As soon as Eddie was sure that he was out of sight, he called Marta downstairs. She brought a torch, 2 towels, some spare clothes for both of them, and an old rusty sickle with her. They went into the kitchen and tried to open Ivan's shotgun cabinet but it was locked. They searched around for the key but could not find it. He must have taken the key with him, Eddie mumbled as he tried to open the door to the storeroom containing animal supplies, but it was also locked. Come on, we should just leave now, so we gain more time to get as far away as possible before he comes back, said Marta fearfully. Marta opened the kitchen side door. Come on. Marta said, looking behind her to see Eddie shaking his head. My chair is too big to go through that door, you'll have to help me out of the door, sit me down, then fold my chair up to bring it outside, then we can go. Marta followed his instructions. As Eddie walked outside to then sit on the floor. He was in pain from walking and had to sit down as fast as he could. Marta folded the chair, brought it out, and helped Eddie back into it. On their way, they went into the backfield past Natalia's snow-covered grave. Marta took off her hat and put it next to the wooden headstone. We're leaving, Mama. Finally we will be free. Marta placed her hand on her mother's name and choked out a goodbye Mama. Tears began to fall as Marta and Eddie walked away. The siblings traveled through the snow for about an hour and as they walked, Marta tried her best to hide their tracks and footprints by patting down snow over them and trying to flatten it. This resulted in her creating a clearly marked path in their direction. Eddie told her to stop and said if you keep doing that, he'll find us for sure. Our best chance is to hope it starts to snow. Martin nodded, continuing to push Eddie towards a forest that was coming up in front of them. Should we go in there? What if we run into wolves, tigers, or bears? She said, scanning the tree line. Eddie stared into the forest. I'd sooner die to them than to Papa. He pointed the sickle towards the forest and said, do you see that? It looks like the silhouette of a house. Marta could see it too. Salvation, she asked hopefully. I don't know, said Eddie, let's just hope they don't mind trespassers. He said worried. They got closer and found it was an old abandoned house. The decrepit house had a collapsed ceiling but for the most part, was still intact. It was getting dark and had begun to snow. Eddie smiled relieved. At least the snow will help hide us, come on, we should get out of the snow before one of us gets sick. Marta laughed. You mean before you get sick? Eddie just smiled at her as they went inside. Meanwhile, back at the house, Ivan had returned, with an unconscious woman in her 20s over his shoulder. He then carried her into his room, locking the door behind him as he went to get the shopping. As he put the groceries away, he called for Eddie but got no reply. Ivan yelled once more, yet again got no answer. He kicked Eddie's bedroom door open, only to find it deserted. Looking around the rest of the house, he realized they had ran away. "Oh, for fuck's sake," he roared as he went into the kitchen to get his shotgun. He investigated around outside, and in the snow were faint wheelchair tracks mostly covered. Ivan looked further up the trail to see Marta's bad attempt to hide the evidence of the direction they escaped in. Ivan followed the trail for a while till the snow completely covered it and he could no longer see their tracks. He knew it pretty much just went straight though, so he carried on. He could hear wolves howling close by and was alert. As he was approaching the wolves in the dark, he could make out the beginnings of a forest in the distance. He shone his torch around, catching the reflective yellow shine from the wolves' eyes locked onto him from a distance. Ivan let off a shot, up in the sky to scare them away. The wolves fled, and in that same moment, Marta was shaking Eddie awake as she knew the distinctive sound of her father's shotgun. In a panic they decided to stay quiet and hide, for they knew Ivan was too close for them to run without being spotted. Ivan made his way up to the old house and stepped inside. "Marta! Eddie! Where are you two little shits?" Ivan shouted as he was unaware he had passed Eddie in the dark, who was bent down in his chair hiding behind an old washing machine and a large china cabinet. Marta, on the other hand, was not so well hidden. She was cowering behind an old dusty sofa that was in front of a window. When Ivan shone his light over the sofa, some of it hit the window, reflecting Marta, revealing her hiding spot. Ivan charged over and grabbed Marta before she had the chance to run. Whacking her head off the floor, he knocked her out and picked her up, flinging her over his shoulder. Eddie came out of hiding to help his half-sister. Ivan pointed his gun at Eddie whilst saying, "Hey, don't do anything stupid or she dies. Understand?" Eddie dropped the sickle and surrendered. "All right, just leave her be." Ivan gave a small huh. He started to leave to go back and Eddie followed, struggling to keep up because of the newly fallen snow. Getting back to the house, Eddie followed Ivan to the stairs. Ivan put Marta in her room and came back to the stairs. "Hey, help me up, I need to get to Marta," Eddie said to Ivan as he was halfway down the stairs. "Help yourself. I'm busy." Eddie was determined to get to his sister and got out of his wheelchair. He was instantly in agony as he stood up and slowly sat down on the second bottom step. He began to lift himself up the stairs one step at a time. Reaching the top, he managed to unfold his spare chair and climb in. Exhausted, Eddie sat for a moment, rubbing his aching leg. Then he made his way into Marta's room. He wiped the blood away from Marta's mouth and nose as she lay there. Ivan came back up to Marta's room with Titan's massive old dog cage. It was that big that Ivan had trouble getting it through the door. Chapter 5: Unexpected Guest. When Ivan got the large cage through the door frame, he placed it in the corner of the room. Pointing at the cage, Ivan ordered Eddie to drag her inside. At first, Eddie refused, but after threatening Marta's life once again, Eddie did as he was told. Ivan gave him a padlock and had him lock the cage door. Eddie stayed by the cage, while Ivan had things to do to ensure they didn't escape again. He took some large but short planks and began drilling them to the front door and the kitchen side door. He was doing this to prevent Eddie from climbing over them. That was why they were about waist height. Marta could easily climb over, but she would never leave Eddie behind, and Ivan knew that. Finishing up his work, Ivan suddenly began hearing his new prisoner yelling and throwing things across the room upstairs. He giggled. Sounds like she's ready to play, he said creepily. Walking up the stairs, he opened the door to his room to find a young terrified woman trying to pry the bars off the window with a broken screwdriver. He grabbed her by her hair and pulled her over to the bedside. The terrified woman screamed, kicked, and thrashed about trying to free herself from his grip. Ivan was old and didn't have the strength to push her down long enough for him to tie her to the bed. So he used all of his weight squashing her against the side of the bed and let her tire herself out. She smacked and kicked him numerous times, but Ivan wouldn't budge. As she became too tired to fight back properly, he pushed her in place. Finally, he had her where he wanted and tied her to the bed. Ivan closed and locked his door so he may begin his torment anew. Eddie could hear the commotion from within Marta's room and felt his stomach turn. In his hand, he was holding a wet piece of cloth. He pulled Marta closer to the bars of the cage so he could clean her face up. He waited for her to get up, trying not to listen to what was going on in the room across, grimacing every time he heard that poor woman's muffled cries. Marta finally woke up and was confused as to where she was. "Eddie, why am I in the dog cage?" Eddie grabbed her hand through the bars and replied, "Papa made me put you in there, I'm sorry." Marta shook her head. "Can you let me out?" Eddie frowned. "Papa has the key," he said with a sad tone. Marta got angry and started kicking the bars, stirring up some old dog fur as she did so. Eddie looked at her with an upset face. "I'll try to convince him to let you out, but I don't know how long it will be before he actually does." Marta stopped kicking and laid there covered in dog hair. She coughed a bit when some went in her mouth. Sitting up, the top of the cage was a ruler's length away from her head. With her legs stretched out fully, she dusted some of the fur off. "Well, whenever he does, I hope it's soon," she said irritatedly. 3 weeks went by and Marta was still locked in the cage with Eddie looking after her, while the kidnapped woman was still being held captive in Ivan's room. The young woman was psychologically in really bad shape. She would constantly ask Ivan to just kill her, because she didn't want to endure his torture anymore. That afternoon the woman managed to loosen her bind on her right arm and she escaped the ties. She searched through Ivan's drawers and found a bottle of sleeping pills that Ivan used to keep Natalia docile. She took the bottle and swallowed every pill, overdosing herself. Ivan found her dead on his floor next to the door 3 hours later. Ivan was absolutely furious that this had happened, but because he was really lazy, he didn't want to drag her outside and bury her. That's why he dragged her into Marta's room and left her there. Marta and Eddie objected to the unwelcome corpse. Ivan just yelled at them and then made a joke. "What, you don't like your new roommate? Well, that's just too bad. Get used to it." The next day Ivan ventured out once again to find his next victim. When his next hostage was brought to the house, she was just barely conscious. She too was brought to his room and bound to the bed. She woke up early but was smarter than the girl she replaced and didn't make a sound. She quietly assessed her surroundings and while trying to make as little noise as possible, she attempted to break out of her binds. With a good yank she managed to break one of the old belts with which she was tied up. She freed her other hand and then untied her legs. Ivan had left the door unlocked, so she snuck out and creeped down the stairs. At the bottom, she looked around the hallway. She was about to make a beeline for the front door, but Ivan appeared from around the corner suddenly, catching her off guard. He stormed towards her, but her being a professional boxer, faced him in a combat stance. Ivan came close enough and she kicked him straight in the ribs. As Ivan bent over in pain, she struck his back with her elbow and forced him backwards onto the floor. She kicked him once more, this time in his face, causing Ivan to become dazed. Then she made a run for it. Running as fast as she could, she made it to the old Lada and hot-wired it. She got it running and made her escape to the village. Chapter 6 Only hell awaits you now. When the demon of an old man awoke, he struggled to get on his feet and peered out the front door. Quickly running into the kitchen, he got his gun and searched the area for her. When Ivan gave up looking, he returned inside and placed his shotgun on the kitchen table. He decided to sit at the table for a moment, then he went to the fridge and grabbed a full bottle of vodka. Sitting for an hour, he finished the bottle and had opened another. After finishing that bottle he could barely walk. Stumbling towards the stairs, Ivan's mind had truly turned toxic. Remembering Natalia's cries to save her daughter, the phrase "she could be useful to you" came to mind. "Marta," he mumbled. As the vile, murdering rapist climbed the stairs on his hands and knees, he pulled himself to his feet against the banister. "Oi, cripple! Come here," he snarled. As the sound of Eddie's chair got closer, Ivan grabbed it and pushed him down the stairs. "I curse the day you were born, boy." Lying on the ground floor, the abused and mistreated man tried to get up. In pain and weakened, he could hardly move. Marta screamed out from within the cage, hoping her brother was not severely injured. Ivan was leaning against the door frame of Marta's room. He got close to the cage and clumsily fell on his knees. "Time to put you to use, Marta." He stared intently. With hands of sin, he unlocked the padlock and in his filthy grip, he pulled her out. Kicking and screaming, Marta struggled in his grip. "Get off me, you foul beast, you are not human, you are nothing but pure filth," she screeched as he staggered backward into his room, holding her by her arms. He fell as she wiggled around and then was pulled up to a sitting position as she tried to get up. Forcing her into his arms, he shuffled over to the bed. Pushing her up to the headboard, he got one hand restrained while fighting with the other. With her struggling movements, he couldn't get her under control. Meanwhile, Eddie's adrenaline kicked in and he had turned himself to face the first step, unwilling to let his father violate his sister. He called out for her, "I'm coming, Marta." Quickly turning to face the kitchen, he dragged himself to the kitchen table, pulling a chair out from underneath. He climbed up and grabbed his father's shotgun, which he had forgotten to lock away. Returning to the stairs as fast as he could, he began to lift himself up, hitting the barrel of the gun against the steps as he ascended. Getting to the top, Eddie stopped to catch his breath. He yelled to try and get his father's attention, but he was too busy to respond. He could see his father's door was closed and thought about shooting it, but instead, he crawled over and stood up, hitting the butt of the gun against the door, which was ajar, opening it fully. Ivan turned and got up, staggering to the door. "Eddie," he roared. Eddie aimed the shotgun and said, "You're mad, father." Shooting his father in the chest, the recoil of the gun knocked him back onto the floor. Marta screamed as blood splattered all over. "Eddie," she squealed. "I'm okay, Marta," he replied in relief, knowing it was all over now. Marta untied her wrist and hugged her brother. They stayed hugging until they heard sirens and people bursting through their front door. The siblings were taken to a hospital while the bodies were removed. A news crew reported on the current events as the news anchor told the audience what had happened. 2 bodies were found in a house west of Magadan today. 2 people, 34-year-old Eddie Lazek and 18-year-old Marta Sharkovsky, were also found inside the building and were taken to a hospital. They both were questioned about the bodies. Eddie admitted to shooting and killing his father, Ivan J. Lazek, but denied killing 23-year-old Elisa Petrov, who, according to forensics, was later discovered to have committed suicide. The bones of 5 babies were found in a pile outside and a buried body was also discovered on the property. Eddie Lazek has been charged for murder and awaits his trial to be sentenced for his crime in a week's time. There will be more on the story after Mr. Lazek's trial. Marta switched off the TV and sat in silence, staring out the window of the rehabilitation center. Eddie sat still for a moment as he finished telling his story to the judge. She looked down at him, with a mildly pleased look on her face, and then declared that Eddie was to be cleared of all charges but due to his mental instability, he was to be placed into an asylum for treatment. Marta visited him as often as she could. On this particular visit, she was sitting in a chair next to him. If you could go back in time, would you still choose to shoot him? Eddie looked at her. Yes, if I had the choice, I'd kill him again.